Do you have another one?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Are you kidding?
Lay them on me, John.
So I did this whole series called Losing the Lamanites,
Okay.
which was, so obviously we've already talked about one of the most horrific doctrines of Mormonism, which is that Native Americans, I mean, this is shocking, but this isn't the shocking thing.
Yeah.
This is the foundation of the shocking thing. So there's this thing called the mound-builder myth, which was this belief in the 1700s in America that, like, whoa, we're finding all these really cool civilizations, remnants of really sophisticated civilizations. But, and I'm using the language of white
Their words.
19th century America. But clearly these savages, these dark, savages couldn't have, they're not intelligent enough, they're not sophisticated enough to have been able to develop this agriculture and art in these major civilizations. There must have been a white race that lived here in America that built all these amazing techniques and civilizations that were then killed off. I mean, obviously, dark civilizations couldn't have done this amazing stuff. So clearly, these dark Native Americans that are all around us, who we're displacing and committing genocide towards, right? Clearly, they couldn't have done it. So they must have killed off this white race of people. So that was a thing. Like Thomas Jefferson, like Benjamin Franklin, if you go back to the 1700s in America, that was kind of a general understanding that somehow, like the 12 tribes of Israel, some of the remnants, the Jews of the 12 tribes of Israel, somehow made their way over to America as white settlers, developed all these amazing civilizations, and somehow these dark civilizations killed off all the white people. And that's who the Puritans and the Pilgrims found when they came over, and the conquistadors when they came over and settled North America and Central and South America. So that's the mound builder myth, right? So clearly when Joseph Smith created the Book of Mormon, he needed a framework to tell the story of the Book of Mormon. So he literally like copies and pastes the mound builder myth into the Book of Mormon. So that's what I just told you is the central premise of Mormonism's holiest text.
I have previously done a couple of brief introductions to these approaches in an interview in Mormon Book Reviews, and on my response to Rod Meldrum, I mentioned this stuff briefly. And then I recently was on Mormonism Live, where we did an episode called Neophytes and Lamanites in the Book of Mormon. So that's kind of where I've shared these ideas before. In our next two episodes, we're going to take a deep dive into Neophyte interpretive models. First, to look at race and gender in the Book of Mormon. We're going to find some exciting new ways to think about race and gender in the Book of Mormon. And this next one on decolonizing the Book of Mormon. How do we actually decolonize the Book of Mormon? How do we place indigenous voices at the center of the analysis?
What I've heard all throughout the episode we just recorded was you saying, if you're going to engage in a field or an arena or a discipline that involves natives, you include them. You put them at the centerpiece, if possible, of history, of writing, of analysis, etc. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that you don't perpetuate the colonization mentality of like the white Western leader exploiting the resources of the minorities or of the natives, extracting whatever provides value, acting like you're the leader, acting like you're the know-it-all, and then just leaving the minority groups sort of ravaged or pillaged or disempowered.
And I would say that if, in my case, if I become the spokesperson for Native people, then I have failed in what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, right. That they should be doing their own analysis. They should be telling their own stories. They should be providing their own reactions. Right?
Yeah, but with it, they don't have the privilege that I have. And see, that's the rub. That's the challenge.
Okay. So I'm trying to real time be reflective about Mormon stories, not and my involvement in it, not to be defensive, but to like take seriously what I'm hearing you say and to process it a little bit. Here's where I'm struggling with what you've put forward a little bit as it relates to Native Americans and Latinos specifically. So what I can say I've tried to do from the very beginning, whether it's with Darius Gray or, Darren Smith or the Losing the Lamanites series or the LGBT community, like what I love about Mormon stories specifically is it's always tried to be centered on people's stories. And I've always tried to interview people to tell their own story. Right.
Right.
So in that sense, I like that structure. I like that that's the structure we kind of came up with. And I've always, whether it's transgender people, LGBT people, gay, lesbian people, Native Americans, Latinos, Hispanics, Europeans, women, like I have always tried to be conscious about lifting minority voices and letting them tell their own stories. I'm going to tell you my honest reaction to that is with a really clumsy, unrefined, and semi-offensive metaphor. Who was the financial broker in New York that defrauded all the people? Let's just say we'll go with Bernie Madoff. Let's just say that Bernie Madoff, who let's just say was kind of a stockbroker investor kind of guy, right? Mm-hmm. And let's just say that he had developed this entire fraudulent financial pyramid scheme that defrauded people of billions of dollars, right? Well, let's say that there were some traces of truth or reality in it, right? People were investing stuff and, there were some investments that happened. But then it was discovered that that financial scheme was a huge fraud and it collapsed, right? I would never want to then lead or initiate or even engage in a discussion about sound financial management or investment principles in the context of sort of the Bernie Madoff school of financial best practices. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. As an extension of what is now known to be a super awful fraud that hurt a lot of people in really significant ways. Okay. I don't know if you see where I'm going here.
Yeah, I think I see.
But now let me tell you where I'm going. Once I realized that the probability of any of that being actually real or historical or true, the fact that all that kind of disappeared for me around 2001 and in small part or in moderate part, thanks to you and your work, right? Mm-hmm. That left me and my work with Mormon stories to be very, very much centered around the truthfulness, the truth claims, which, by the way, I've learned is kind of frowned upon in the Mormon studies community to ever even talk about truth claims or to even make references to them. It's deeply offensive and polarizing and divisive, which has put me at odds with many in the Mormon studies community for a long time, because that's really all that matters to me. If I had to pick one thing that matters to me, it's truth, right? And truth in the sense of not like myth, but like, did this stuff really happen or not? And if it didn't, then it's, I agree with Gordon B. Hinckley. It's one of the biggest frauds ever perpetrated on mankind, right? It's not just like, oh, well, it's like Santa Claus. Who doesn't love Christmas? You know what I mean? So I've always taken that really seriously. And that's been probably the main, along with social justice, mm-hmm. right? Which is important to me. Feminism is important to me. Anti-racism is important to me. LGBT community is genuinely important to me. Like, it's kind of truth claims and like marginalized communities that have been harmed. That's kind of what's driven me. And along with informed consent, people deserving to know the truth so they can make informed decisions. So when I think about a bunch of these beautiful Native American and Latino scholars, right, engaging in serious Mormon studies scholarship, knowing that they were all sold a Bernie Madoff-like scheme that at its root was at best the work of a pious fraud, and at worst, the work of a charlatan, and I'm going to just go really hard here, likely sexual predator, right? The idea of having beautiful people like Sarah or Angelo or Gina have to take seriously this arena and work within it like it would be to ask the people defrauded by Bernie Madoff to then attend the school of Bernie Madoff financial education. It's worse than that, because these people already were displaced and killed and disrespected without Mormonism, right? Genocide level offenses. Then you add to that, if it's true that Joseph Smith was just like totally out of his league, disrespecting these people, in adding insult to injury with what many would say was probably a fraud, to have them like working in the Mormons. Let's talk about the Book of Mormon, finding creative ways to have them re-engage the Book of Mormon. I'm like, that's like asking the people who Bernie Madoff defrauded to then like re-engage Bernie Madoff's story in a more creative, edifying way. It feels, there's a part of me in my worldview that's privileged and all that. It feels almost insulting and degrading to ask them to do that, or to even like, it's like, why are you doing this? Like, no, go do amazing scholarship for Native peoples, for Latinos, for, but like, to even have to like engage the Book of Mormon feels almost like a re-traumatizing request, let alone disrespectful. I just like, I'm trying to wrap my brain around how it's not insulting to have them engaging in this conversation, when if I were them, I would feel so insulted and traumatized, re-traumatized by what Mormonism has brought to Native Americans and Latinos specifically. It almost feels insulting. Now, Gerardo, I want to give, do you agree? Do you not agree? Do you think it's rude what I just asked? I want to ask you before I have Thomas respond. Or can you even see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I was having some of those thoughts as I was reading the decolonization article. Why does it matter? Like, if it's not true, why does it matter to keep engaging with it and trying to make it in some way valuable myth? The more I've heard like the story you've told, and just considering it, I mean, I think nothing is black and white, right? In some way, there can be, I find some beauty in engaging with some of these myths and really understanding where could Joseph grabs a lot of these ideas from, and really engaging with those like original ideas where the actual Book of Mormon was inspired from. So I kind of have like conflicting thoughts about it, but I definitely see where you're coming from, because I had the same kind of thoughts.
One of the most visceral, offensive things I've ever contemplated in this whole Mormon stories, Mormonism space, is the fact that Joseph Smith gave people a false identity about themselves that was made up. Killing people is awful, genocide is awful. So like, we'll say that those, rape and torture, like those things are really, really awful. Like, one step up from that, in my view, is like giving people a false narrative about who they are and what their identity is, kind of like the mound-builder myth, when their own heritage is so rich and beautiful and inspiring. To then give them this false, racist, offensive identity about themselves is like, and I'm not even a person of color, but like, that really bothers me, right? So that's informing the passion behind not just the racism of the Book of Mormon, but and of the mound-builder myth, but just of like giving people a false identity that now for multiple generations, I'm a Lamanite. I'm a proud soy Lamanito. I'm proud. Like, that is so offensive to me, and I'm not even a person of color or Native American. So there's the softball, and I hope I haven't made you want to. I haven't made you regret coming on Mormon Stories by answering that, but I'm being honest.
No, but I have lots of thoughts running through my head. But I mean, some of the things that we've been called is, well, you guys are nationalists, and you're racist and so forth, and you're white supremacy people, and all these
funny thing, I think it's so hilarious because I think the one you came to, Kara, we had a Native American celebration with like 20 Native Americans and so forth. If that's racist or somehow white supremacist, I'm kind of like,
And we'll
beyond
People do
me.
things for interesting reasons. That's a different topic for another reason.
Yeah.
and we'll
I mean,
cover
there
that.
was a singing of the Red Man song at that celebration too. So that's neither here nor there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Remember
And
that
we
one,
can-
John?
we'll-
It's like that's one of the reasons why I want to speak up against it, because it's like, no, this has ramifications beyond, really negative, horrible stuff for society. And I tell people, like, if you come to me and you tell me you're experiencing oppression or racism, and you show me, but what's going on, and I believe you, it's because you've appealed to our common humanity. But the moment you pretty much talk down to me by saying I can't understand your lived experience, then we're locked into our own intellectual wasteland, intellectual ghetto, if you will, and we can't cross that divide then with this standpoint epistemology. And I don't think Native people, a lot of the younger generation, have really thought it through. Like, this is actually giving like political power or credence to actual racist ideologies already. And it's like, I was actually talking to my daughter. It was about maybe 3 months ago. Excuse me. And she had mentioned kind of what we're talking about. And I said, my biggest fear is what if the so-called dominant group in society takes seriously this critique, this critical race theory, and says, you know what, you're right. Part of my dominance is that I don't listen to an inferior group of people. And instead of relinquishing, they double down on tyranny. You know what I mean? Or they double down on it. And it's like, you're actually empowering, because of the standpoint of epistemology, this lived experiences, you're actually giving power to these racist critiques of society. And it's like, no, this could start like a hot war or a race war. I want to avoid that at all costs. I've read enough history to know, like, the French Revolution, what's happened. And it's like, ideas have consequences. I mean, I've heard people say, no, it's just an idea. It's like, that's the most dangerous part of it. It is an idea. It's infectious. It catches on. And once it catches on, we've got to stop it now in the theoretical stage. I mean, it's kind of already wedded to power as it is now. But if we can stop this, and try to mitigate it, then we can hopefully save our civilization, is how I look at it, our customs and traditions. And I think there's enough within the Native community that if we can tap into that as Native people, that there's this whole, I was gonna say, cornucopia of ideas that really stand the test of time, because they're appealing to basically liberal values, the liberal order of things, the classical liberal values of an open society of freedom. That's what they're constantly appealing to, is that treat us the same as you want to be treated under the law. There should be an exceptions for different classes of people. And I think going down this other road we seem to be heading down is like that's going to all get done away with, and it's just not good.
Who proclaim to be prophets, seers, and revelators, who are just like in line and step with a lot of the racist theories of their day, though.
This is what Thomas Murphy would say, as a way for white-skinned people to find a way to justify or feel better about their genocidal, racist treatment of dark-skinned people. They wrote into either the Bible or interpretations of the Bible, or wrote into the Book of Mormon or modern-day prophet, seer, and revelator statements. They wrote into that their racism.
If someone who's acting as a prophet is acting in a racist manner, are they not acting under Satan's influence?
Is that if all of God's children are his children, and all have an equal opportunity to become like he is, then is God being racist? Obviously not.
But the Bible and the Book of Mormon and Mormon prophets, seers, and revelators have made that association, and it's led to a century and a half of racist beliefs and justifications within Mormonism. So we've got that. That's just a fact of our history. And so why did God let the scriptures, Mormon scripture and the Bible and Mormon prophets, seers, and revelators make those racist associations? So did Brigham Young teach racist things?
Possibly. I mean,
But you won't just flat out
But
say
yeah.
that Brigham Young was racist and that he taught super racist things and he owned slaves and that was super racist. You're not comfortable just condemning those teachings and behaviors of Brigham Young as racist?
I guess I'd have to say I don't know.
Is it because you're uncomfortable calling one of the Lord's anointed racist?
I would be definitely uncomfortable with that. But
Okay.
on the other hand, I know that there are races, and the word racist is tossed out there an awful lot to mean specific things in our society that wasn't necessarily the same situation in their society. Blah 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 blah. Or is he speaking as his own personal opinion?
But then why wouldn't you say
And
in
so-
Brigham Young's own personal opinion, he could have been racist and that those
Yeah.
sayings were racist?
Okay, because then the response from you would be, well, if he was racist and he was a prophet, then
No, that actually
blah, blah,
wouldn't be
blah.
my response.
okay,
That's
that's what I would expect that your response would be.
No.
That means he's not a prophet because he had racist ideas.
Nope. It all
Okay.
depends on what your definition of a prophet is. That you actually are open to the idea that Brigham Young was a racist, but you didn't want to admit that to me because then
believe
you
it.
were worried that
Yeah.
I would then.
I believe he
turn
was
a-
a prophet. And so does the prophet mean that everything that every utterance that comes out of him or that he writes down is the will and so forth of God? And of course, the answer to that is no.
So it could be that
So
Brigham
it's
Young.
possible he was a product of his time as well as other people and
So it
other
could.
prophets.
So it could
Yeah.
be that Brigham Young or Joseph Smith or Bruce R. McConkie
had
or Joseph Felix
ideas.
Smith were racist or said racist things, but you don't want to necessarily say that because you really respect the office of prophet. And
Because when he was speaking as a prophet, I believe he was a prophet. But otherwise,
then why can't you condemn the racist things Brigham Young said? And yeah, he wasn't speaking as a prophet when he said the racist things, but he said racist things.
Yeah.
Why can you say that now? Or do you just
I'll just
not?
put it this way. I'm still a bit uncomfortable with that idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
racism is uncomfortable. Imagine how
Because,
black
yeah,
people
it
feel.
is. It is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay.
But you don't want to. You don't want to. You're not comfortable saying that any of God's prophets or revelators were
Well,
racist.
the thing about it is the connotation of what a racist is today versus what was going on back in that time frame is much different. I think.
Are you
It could
comfortable
be.
saying that Brigham Young was a racist by modern standards?
By modern standard, I'd probably say yeah.
Is that maybe Brigham Young and Bruce R. McConkie and Joseph Felix Smith and other Mormon prophets, seers, and revelators,
Maybe it was a product of their time
and maybe they were racist.
at the time. Based
But-
on
but
our
based
standards
on-
now, it would probably come across as being very racist. Yeah.
It would be racist, not come across as racist. Actually, be racist.
My point. You're trying to make it a racist, whole argument. And if you take a look at throughout all of history and you add in the Asiatic people and
Okay, but I'm
so
just
forth,
trying to say something very simple, which is over the past
Yeah.
500 years,
Yeah.
white men of European descent
here in America,
and in Europe and elsewhere have wreaked
not in
Un-
not in China,
untold.
not in Africa.
I'm saying, here's what I'm saying.
Okay.
That
In a
men
specific area.
men of European descent
Right.
have wreaked genocidal havoc and untold brutality and genocide on generations of people of darker skin colors, and that's a horrible and an awful thing.
Absolutely.
And to then just say, well, there needs to be opposition in all things and God's ways are higher than our ways, doesn't reflect our as white men of European descent, our adequate reflection on the brutality and the severity and the awfulness of what we've sort of done.
Okay, but John,
I mean, look at you. You weren't wanting to say Joseph Smith was a racist, Brigham Young was a racist, Bruce R. McConkie. You were like, oh, I don't want to say that, but you're super cool saying God did it. The
Sure.
church has had racist policies for 200 years. There's
it
never
was
been
in a
enough
predominantly
members.
white community.
I'm just
What atonement would you want
an
to see?
apology. How about an apology? How about a denunciation of the past doctrines as racist? The model itself and a lot of the people who adhere to the Heartland model are often described as racist. And so I know I'm not saying it's
A
right.
lot of people
I'm saying
are.
that I'm just saying that's
Anytime-
often
Yeah.
that's often mentioned when I've mentioned Heartland theory before I really knew anything about it.
Oh, they're a bunch of racists.
I had a bunch of people say to me, "This is a bunch of racist people." And these are racist theories. And we can get into later the fact that
That's just
the
a
mound
simple
builder myth
Ignorance
was literally
and so forth.
based on racist ideologies prior to Joseph Smith.
yeah.
What's in front of us is
Yeah.
we've still got racism in America. We've still got lots of systemic racist problems. And
Yeah,
That-
but
just let
Christianity,
me just- I'll
Christianity is
just
all
wanna
about forgiveness too. I mean, what?
It's that our history, exterminate the brutes, our history of white people subjugating people of color, teaching racist things, enslaving, genocide of Native Americans.
Right.
Our history
All
is
those
so atrocious, so terrible, so awful that our job isn't to say God did it, or we don't understand God's ways, or well, we've stopped it, so now let's just move on. For me,
Or that he needed to do that because of like manifest destiny, and that's just the way that he wanted things to go. And God is kind of a brutal God. He's kind of the,
right? For me, our job is to condemn all those racist teachings as not being of God, as being the wickedness of men, scripture, prophets, whatever, condemn it all, and to really sit in understanding the pain and the suffering we've caused people as white people, and then to really think hard about, are there things we can do now, whether it's with the legal system, whether it's with the judicial system, whether it's with poverty, all those things. Are there things we can do now to try and make it better? I just want to say, for me, I'm just saying for me now, you don't have to answer this.
Right.
I'm now just wanting to make sure I state what I think and feel. And
Yeah.
that's that our history, exterminate the brutes, our history of white people subjugating people of color, teaching racist things, enslaving, genocide of Native Americans.
Right.
Our history
All
is
those
so
things.
atrocious, so terrible, so awful that our job isn't to say God did it, or we don't understand God's ways, or well, we've stopped it, so now let's just move on. For me, it just means that a lot of people of color, and a lot of people who
Well,
lived
wait.
before
Where
the
did the
modern
color
era.
thing come from? This isn't a race thing. This is just everybody. This
I'm
is
not
all the
saying
kids.
you're racist, and I'm not saying
Yeah.
the church is racist, but the implications are, it just so happens a lot of white people from Idaho and Utah
it was
get
res-
exaltation. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it's overtly explicitly racist, but the implications of it mean that a lot of non-Utahns and Idahoans are kind of left out of exaltation.
I'm not saying you're racist. I'm not.
Yeah.
Is causing people to believe racist things because they believe the evidence of the Book of Mormon supports it, or they are becoming
Yeah.
more dogmatic. They're
Well,
more
that-
hateful towards gay people now
Yeah.
because they think that that's what the God wants them to. That your evidence is making families be torn apart because everything revolves around you didn't bless your baby, you're not baptizing your kids, you're wearing a tank top. And I had to recognize that I'm saying that as a person who's white, who's never had to deal with racist people in the church.
One quick thing, somebody's saying that the term Asiatic is actually kind of
Racist.
racist and not good to be used anymore. I was just passing that on. Have you heard that before? It's a super hot topic, and some of the positions you were holding, I'm not saying are racist, but would be some would consider them to be racist, and they were certainly triggering for people of color, skin theory. And then there's a second part of that, which is that it's also viewed as a very racist sort of idea. Okay. All right. So, okay. So you acknowledge that the mound-builder myth predated Joseph Smith, and that could have been the source for where he gets the idea of dark skin and light skin.
It was clearly something that was being bantered about in his time frame. Yes.
And you acknowledge that it's viewed as a very racist theory now. That because
it shouldn't be just viewed as it was racist.
Okay. But because Central and South America, Mexico, they were agrarian cultures. They developed corn, they developed tomatoes, they developed beans, they domesticated animals.
They're highly civilized.
And all the temples and massive cities. We are to respect our Native American ancestors, not to think that you're racist. And I'm not saying the church is racist. So it's a very racist theory at its core. Am I right?
Yeah. Well, I guess the other thing was that the mounds were, they were very compelling because they also had quite elaborate, breastplates and metalwork. Much of it was from native copper, that I think it's from Michigan. But also there were some mounds where they had, steel objects hide how impressive they were. And, it's also incredibly racist, really. They're essentially claiming, because this is going back to the mound-builder myth. They're essentially claiming that scientists are hiding the presence of Jews who had migrated to America and inspired these earthworks. That's what they're claiming.
Yeah.
Um,
And what's racist
that's-
about that?
in my
Steve?
view, is-
What's
that's
racist? What's racist about that?
They're claiming that in order to build those amazing structures, they needed the input of Europeans. They needed Jewish people to come over there and inspire them, and just like
White people. We didn't need
John
white.
Sorensen claims in Mesoamerica with the mines. John Sorensen and BYU and the farms crowd, it's racist to claim that Jews were necessary to inspire the mine culture to come to flourish and become so amazing.
And that's what the mound builder myth,
Yep.
was
Yes.
claiming
And
in the 1700s.
If you to support a false claim, that's
Yeah,
pretty much what they're
yeah.
saying. But right now that we're talking about this racist claim of the mountain builder myth and all that stuff, if you read the conclusion, John, can you read that? You
Yeah.
probably have it bigger.
Yeah, I can. In the past, many scholars have pointed to a sometimes explicitly racist agenda behind the claims of diffusionists who argue that the glories of Native American civilizations were achieved only through borrowing from various old world groups. The producers of The Lost Civilizations of North America, that's Rodney Meldrum's DVD, right?
And of course, Rod Meldrum didn't invent this idea. That's a racist idea. Okay. And so that gives us a really challenge. We can either say we are racists, and I think that's what you wanted what Rod Meldrum thought you wanted him to say is, yeah, I'm a racist, which, most people won't do. I mean, even Donald Trump would admit he was a racist, and I can't think of very many more racist people out there. So I hope I didn't offend some of your viewers. Again,
Hey, Mormon Stories is apolitical. Thomas Murphy's comment does not represent necessarily the opinions of the Mormon Story staff.
yeah, but racists usually don't admit it. Okay. And really, at some level, all humans are prejudiced towards each other and, and ethnocentric. And if we're honest with ourselves, we'll acknowledge that we take shortcuts in identifying people.
First, I want to elaborate upon a fallacy called the Kafka trap. And once I explain this fallacy, I promise to tie this back into Robin DiAngelo's main thesis. Now, a Kafka trap is a fallacy in which a denial of an accusation is taken as confirmation of that accusation. This line of reasoning is false. Just because you are accused of something doesn't make it true or that guilt has been established. Denying that you are a witch is itself proof that you are a witch, because witches always deny being witches. You cannot extricate yourself from it because how the statement is framed means that the outcome is already predetermined. Now, although this example is fairly simple, it proves a profound point, which is the very real danger of what happens when people employ this false line of reasoning called a Kafka trap. And history is replete with such examples. And that danger is not only harder to spot, but compounded when this trap is hidden and set under layers upon layers of academic prose and scholarly jargon. I want to break this down some more because this is very important. A Kafka trap is, in one sense, a very sophisticated rhetorical trick that, unless you're aware of it, you'll struggle to disentangle yourself from it. How I look at a Kafka trap is that it's a combination of multiple fallacies all rolled into one. A Kafka trap contains, right out of the gate, what is called petitio principii, a begging the question. It does this by making an assertion, a claim, or an assumption. It assumes the very thing it should be proving. It asserts or claims the very thing that it needs to first prove. And in so doing, it is both unfair and false. It is more along the lines of a character assassination rather than proof. A Kafka trap also contains what is called a loaded question or loaded statement, which means that it contains within it the presumption of guilt. It's not asking for clarification or for truth, but agreement. as it severely limits the range of options available so that the desired outcome is already guaranteed and any defense is precluded. This is also called presenting a false dilemma or the either or fallacy. It constrains one's choices down to only a few options, either this option or that option. It leaves out what is called in Latin a tertium quid, a third option. A classic example of this fallacy is the famous courtroom line of questioning, such as, "Are you still beating your wife? Are you still mistreating your children? Or are you still cheating on your taxes?" If you say no to any of those questions, you're still guilty. And if you say yes, well, then you've only admitted or confessed to your guilt. Each one of those questions is an attack upon the person's character, presumes guilt, limits the choices available, and in so doing, reaches an already pre established conclusion. And in this sense, a Kafka trap is really about framing. And understanding this is so important because there's a strategy or ulterior motive at play when someone uses a Kafka trap. And that strategy is as old as time, which is this: he or she who controls the framing of an argument usually wins the argument. What I'm going to say next is also going to sting. If you are Native American, why would you flirt with or adopt a belief system that simply continues another form of the legacy of paternalism? Why would you allow these progressives, these progressive elites, to define what being Native is or isn't? Doesn't that right belong to each tribal member and each heterogeneous tribe? Why would you adopt a system of thought that undermines tribal autonomy? Why would you sell your birthright, your mind, and your spirit to a system of thought that demands that you conform to its beliefs, that demands that you assimilate to its beliefs? Otherwise, you're not Native. Those aren't my words, but hers. Those aren't my beliefs, but those are the beliefs of these critical race theorists. Please stop allowing the talking heads on TV to frame this belief system as left versus right, as Democrat versus Republican, or Trump supporters versus Biden supporters. This issue is bigger than all of that. Don't fall into the media's framing trap that there is only two choices available. I could go on, but I hope I've made my point.
Instead, we lead the Republican Party. Utah is literally one of the top 3 most red, most Republican states. And again, it's not about partisanship, but there's going to be a problem. You know, where are the black people? Which party are they in? They tend to be Democrats, right? And white supremacists tend to be Republicans. So if in Utah and if Mormons tend to be the most red of all states / religions, there's something wrong there.
All right, so before we get to the political nonsense, let's talk about something really important: Ancient Apocalypse, the Netflix show. Why do I want to talk about Ancient Apocalypse? Because, not so much because of the content, because it is a perfect representation of the information crisis, which I believe is the most important thing happening. It may not be the most important thing happening in the moment, but I think it's the big picture of what's happening. So this is by a guy named Graham Hancock. He identifies as an investigative journalist. They keep calling him a pseudo-archaeologist, but that's not fair. He's not. And he has a theory about the world. Let's take just a quick look at the trailer. Let's cut 6.
I don't think we're seeing the origins of civilization at the end of the Ice Age. I think we're seeing a reboot of civilization that existed previously.
So his theory is basically that before the last Ice Age, about 12,000 years ago, about 10,000 years before Christ, it was called the Younger Dryas, because when all the ice melted, it was hard to find a place where you could keep your ass dry. I just made that part up. But anyway, his theory is that before the Ice Age, there was an advanced civilization, kind of like the legends of Atlantis, the sunken city, and that after the Ice Age came the floods, which are, celebrated in legends and in the Bible and all this. But some of the people from this hyper-civilized society, remained, and they traveled the world teaching people how to build and how to do certain things. And that's why you find very sophisticated buildings that seem to date back, or possibly could date back to the Ice Age, even though most people think there were not highly civilized societies before that. And the sites, I have to say, I watched the entire thing. It was very gripping. The sites he visits are, his basic idea is that all these hunter-gatherers, these primitive people were there, and then these guys from Atlantis or whatever came and taught them all these different skills. So the sites he visits are incredibly interesting, but, you know, the actual famous real sites. Some of them just actually interesting to hear him describe them. He raises some interesting questions, like why are there so many myths about people bringing culture to a civilization? The myth of Prometheus. Why does Prometheus have to bring fire? You would think that would be an easy thing for man to discover. Just watch lightning set a tree on fire and realize it's more fun to cook your meat and eat it after you put it over the fire. That seems like an easy discovery. Why does Prometheus bring it? I've always wondered how they figured out to turn wheat into bread. That seems like a much more difficult discovery. But even in Black Panther, the movie, remember the culture comes from the sky. It comes out of it's not people inventing culture, it's culture being given to them. But other things are a lot less convincing. He talks about the repeated use of pyramids and the fact that pyramids are often tombs, and he says that they all have the same idea, but the pyramid is an easy thing to build, and the human mind is not that varied. People think of the same things all the time. Happens in Hollywood all the time. They come up with the same movies in different places. The whole thing kind of reminded me when I was a kid. There was a book called Chariot of the Gods. It made a very big splash, claiming that the pyramids were built by aliens, that their aliens had come and given civilization. It was silly stuff. People enjoyed it, and it speaks to something. But the point is not for me whether what Hancock says is true or not. My point is how we deal with what he's doing. Let's talk about Hancock first. The first thing is he doesn't allow in any counter evidence into his story. And that's very important psychologically. This is why I didn't cover the January 6 hearings, because they didn't cross-examine. And even a good journalist, this is perfectly natural. This is the human nature. They will start to say, well, there's no cross-examination, but here's an interesting fact. No. If there's no cross-examination, there are no interesting facts. You have to hear both sides. And if you don't think that's true, think about how easily you are fooled by absurd conspiracy theories until you hear the other side, the absurd. You know, Joe Rogan appears on this Graham Hancock show. And I thought to myself, I like Joe Rogan. I think he does terrific work, but I don't care what he thinks about this guy's theory. Why should I care? Why should you care what I think about his theory? You know, you got to talk to archaeologists. But this brings me up to the other side of this. If anything gives Graham Hancock's amazingly weird theory any kind of credibility, it was the way that archaeologists reacted. Now, to be fair, Hancock rips into archaeologists the whole thing, and a lot of it was unfair. It was all about how, you know, they dismiss him and they're condescending and they're, you know, small-minded. But archaeology is really hard, and you've got this very, you know, there's a famous story called the Motel of the Mysteries, where they uncover a motel and, of course, make all the wrong judgments about what everything is. It's hard to do archaeology. You're getting very little stuff. So you find a picture of a woman, they say, well, it was a fertility goddess, but maybe it was a piece of porn. You know, you don't know what it was. It's really hard. It's all speculation. So he's very tough on them. So their responses, just really, really interesting. The Society of American Archaeology wrote a letter to Netflix urging the platform to reclassify the show as science fiction rather than documentary, arguing it publicly disparages archaeologists and devalues the archaeological profession. So what? Publicly disparaging archaeologists isn't a crime, and it isn't a reason for Netflix to care. You know, I mean, maybe he's right. He's putting forward an opinion. What you want to do is you want to debunk him. You know, have been stories in the past where the experts were wrong and an amateur was right. Schliemann, back in the 19th century, discovered Troy. You know, and he was kind of a con man. He got things wrong, and he did it wrong. But he did find the city of Troy when other people say, no, it's just Homer, was just poetry. It was just a myth. So these things do happen, and disparaging archaeologists, you have no right to respect. You don't have a right to respect. You earn respect. Now, if I'm an archaeologist, I don't write to Netflix to attack the film. I post videos debunking the film, and I might want to make a documentary debunking the film. And some people did do this. There were a lot of them. There weren't enough of them, but there were a lot of them. There's a site called Ancient Archaeology. Now, Hancock's most convincing episode is about a site in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. And he says it appears out of nowhere, and there was no sign that they could build something so spectacular before this. So it must have been the guys from Atlantis came and taught them how to do it. And Ancient Archaeology posted this on YouTube debunking this. And this is how it's done. Cut 7.
In Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix, when talking about the 11,600-year-old site of Göbekli Tepe, Graham Hancock says,
"You can't just wake up one morning with no prior skills, no prior knowledge, no background in working with stone and create something like Göbekli Tepe. There has to be a long history behind it, and that history is completely missing."
But in ancient Anatolia, there are a number of sites with origins older than Göbekli Tepe, going back to the Epi-Paleolithic, and this number is growing all the time. Çakmak Tepe in particular is now a growing site of interest because it shows a clear evolutionary step in human skills, architecture and art. None of these sites were mentioned in the show, but prove that these people lived through the Younger Dryas and did have A. prior skills, B. prior knowledge, and C. a clear background of working with stone.
That's how you do that. You show what the guy said, you show the answer to what he said. I happen to know that this video is absolutely right. There are these older sites. That's how you debunk somebody. You don't tell them, oh, take the show off the air. Or, there was one guy, they wouldn't even let Hancock on their site to film because they didn't like his theories, and it makes them look like children, and it makes Hancock look like the big boy in the room. That's not how you do it, and it's so often how experts react. Now, I showed you a good version, but a lot of the reaction from archaeologists, from professors, and from professional debunkers, misinformation guys, was much different. And I'm taking this one guy out. His name is Farley, Bill Farley. He's an associate professor of archaeology, but I don't mean to pick on him. I'm just doing him because he represents a lot of the stuff that they got. Here is one of his attacks on Graham Hancock. This is cut 8.
I'm not going to knock the guy for writing books and selling books, whatever. But he's being elevated right now into this thing called the intellectual dark web. For those of you who aren't aware, this is the sort of loosely knit group of conservative thinkers like Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, and in this case, most notably, Jordan Peterson. I think Graham Hancock is the Jordan Peterson of archaeology. Now, I have complex, nuanced feelings about Jordan Peterson. I'm not going to discuss that here in this video. Hancock is an interestingly similar figure, right? He doesn't always say heinous stuff. He's not constantly lying. Sometimes he says things that are nice, but he has this academic-like pedigree. He doesn't have a PhD, and he's not a professor like Peterson, but he has this long pedigree of publication and decades in the public eye to lean on in a very similar way. That makes him potentially more impactful and dangerous, right?
So he's on I like the way he explains the dark web. For those of you who are not familiar with it, the dark web is where they teach terrorists how to make bombs. It's not Ben Shapiro explaining the Constitution and Jordan telling you to make your bed and get married and talking to experts about the Bible. That is not the dark web. I'm sorry, we have a lot of good qualities, but one of them is not being the dark web here at the Daily Wire. And he has Joe Rogan up there. It's just people he disagrees with. And the fact that Graham Hancock, there's nothing political in this. There's not one political thing in this. But this is the other thing he says. And I'm not picking on this particular guy, but this is representative of a lot of things that people were saying and given credence in the press for saying it. Here's cut 9.
I don't know if Graham Hancock is a racist. I don't know if Graham Hancock is a white supremacist. He may or may not be. But what he does not do in this show is address a long and deep history of white supremacy that is associated with his ideas. So Hancock's ideas, some of them are his own, some of them are borrowed from previous scholars going back to the 19th century and earlier, and all of them are utilized and associated with white supremacy movements. They are used to undercut indigenous claims to landscapes. They're used to undercut the achievements of indigenous people and ancient peoples of all types around the world. They are problematic, and they are used to launder ideas by white supremacists and white supremacist groups. So my question to Hancock is this. You knew that was going to be a criticism of this show. You understood that going into it. I know you knew that. So why don't you address it?
So, I don't know that this guy is a pedophile. He may or pedophile. He may or may not be a pedophile, Nazi, communist. He may or may not be. But he knew I was going to say it about him, so why didn't he address it? It's an absurd thing to say. What he's referring to is the thesis that these indigenous people didn't have skills, so therefore they must have been given to them by somebody greater than they are. But Hancock makes absolutely no claims about the racial quality of these people. I think he believes they come from Turkey, really. And he also is very respectful toward indigenous people. He talks about their skills and all this. It's just crap. And the thing is, violating leftist orthodoxy doesn't make the thing you say untrue. Even if Hancock, and he's not, but even if he were a racist or a white supremacist, the words coming out of his mouth might be the facts, right? He might be he's talking about archaeology. The archaeology might be the facts. This thing about calling people racist, calling people white supremacists is a failure of the expert class. And that's what they keep arguing about. There's another lawyer, Timothy Caulfield, and they call him a debunker of misinformation. And he says, Ancient Apocalypse is just one example of a wider cultural trend denying expertise and the value of science. It almost makes denying expertise sound like a noble task. Well, if the experts stop calling people racist, if they stop lying about Hunter Biden's laptop, or whether the vaccines were properly tested to see if they would stop the spread of disease, or whether they do stop the spread of disease, or whether the disease came from China or not, if they would stop lying to us, if they would stop trying to control us instead of informing us, maybe debunking experts wouldn't look like such a fun thing to do, like such a noble thing to do. This is the information crisis. It's people fighting for their power position, for their status positions, rather than doing the job that makes those positions worthwhile. You're not an expert if you lie. If you're you're just a liar if you lie. You might have expertise, but the minute you start lying, you're no longer an expert. You're just a liar. Fauci lied. The government has lied. The left has lied about amazing millions of things. Our president lies. We wouldn't be debunking them if it weren't possible to do it. Twitter lied at the behest of the FBI. So all of this stuff is part of this crisis that we're in. And this Ancient Apocalypse, it's a silly show. I'm not going to tell you it's true. That's the whole problem. The conspiracy theories sound true because the people debunking them have lost our respect, and they deserve to have lost our respect.